Everybody, my name is Tiffany Mapanda. I hope you all had a nice day. Now we're gonna read a book called Storytime with Grandma and Rudo. But before we read this book, the first thing we're gonna look at the back is the blurb and the author name. Let's start with that. The author who wrote this book is called Gladys Mapanda. Gladys shares a memory of her grandma who used to sit with her and tell her tales about animals. She is an author of 3 other short story books found on Amazon. She enjoys writing short stories all about life, and this is her first children's book. Now, before we start reading the first story here, there's this part. We're gonna read this, okay. Rudo and Grandma. Growing up in a village, Rudo looked forward to the time when the moon and stars were out and they would sit around the fire with grandmother. Grandma's tales is something that Rudo treasured and tried to remember so she can tell her own grandchildren. Unless technology would take over. Rudo remembers some of the tales and stories Grandma told her. She also chuckles when she remembers some of the myths. She would remind her parents when they were about to give her food, and Rudo did some actions which resulted in her grandma chastening her in a very strong tone. The first story we're going to read is called The Hare and the Baboon. Grandma, do you know the hare and baboon were very close when they lived in the animal kingdom? They played and they visited each other all the time. They used to sit around the fire and chat. So, here's Mr. Baboon, here's Mrs. Baboon in a traditional Zimbabwe cooking pot, and here's the hare. Mrs. Baboon used to cook good food, which the hare loves. They used to play games as uncle and nephew as the relationship grew. But one day, Mrs. Baboon felt sick. Mr. Baboon was very sad and the hare noticed this. Mrs. Baboon did not get any better as time moved on. Mr. Baboon was at his wit's end. He would sit not knowing what to do. The hare suggested Mr. Baboon to go visit a spiritual healer in the hills to get medicine. He agreed and left the hare in charge of his wife. He left for days. So, here is the Mrs. Baboon laying on a log. A log is kind of like, say, like a comfy bed for baboons. And this is the hare saying he's going to look after Mrs. Baboon. Unfortunately, Mrs. Baboon got sick and died, which saddened the hare. He decided to cook the meat and leave it for Uncle when he came back in with the medicine. Mr. Baboon was anxious to give it to his brother. The hare told him to eat first since he was hungry and tired. He agreed and sat down whilst the hare pretended to mix the medicine and went into the room. Mrs. Baboon was supposed to be sleeping. He waited until he heard the footsteps of his uncle before jumping and squeezing through the door, shouting, "Uncle, you have eaten your wife. Uncle, you have eaten your wife," repeatedly. The baboon was furious and started chasing him. To this day, the baboon and hare don't see eye to eye. That's where the story ends. So here is Mr. Baboon finishing his food, and here's the traditional Zimbabwe cooking pot again, and here's the hare telling the Mr. Baboon that he's eaten his wife. And that is the end of the first story called The Hare and the Baboon. I hope you all have a nice day. Bye.